Back to and cut. So, yeah,
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another product meetup. And we actually have a huge release today for our Sitecore product. And with me here is Christian. So, dude, how are you?
I'm fine, Tim. Thanks for doing this, and I'm fine. How are you? All
All
good?
good. You asked me for an intro. There it is.
Yeah, there it is.
So,
Nice.
let's talk a little bit about this Sitecore thing that we've done.
Yeah.
So,
So not too long ago, though, we released the latest version of our Sitecore product, which is called Uniform for Sitecore,
mhm.
in which we have essentially combined all of the learnings that we've picked up over the years working with our Uniform for Sitecore product. And now the combined product is available to partners and customers. And with that product, we truly have an offering that can solve some of those typical problems that we see with traditional Sitecore implementations.
Okay, that makes sense. We've been actually doing that for over a year now, I think.
Yeah,
And we are now at version 5. It was, I guess, one of the biggest releases we've done. And
yeah,
so um, I've used this stuff before, right? Because I've been working with Sitecore at agencies for a while.
mm,
And the
yeah,
funny thing is, I guess the things we've come up with in this product, you can do them without, but it costs a lot of effort and a lot of
yeah.
money for your team to actually take all that time and do those things. And so, can you maybe highlight for the people that were watching what are the main features of this product so that
Absolutely.
maybe you can just get our license from us rather than spending months and months on coding something yourself?
So this release or the release of Uniform for Sitecore helps businesses really make a better business case with their existing or new builds of Sitecore. So we help businesses decouple Sitecore and the applications that they build to make sure that the performance and scalability is sort of never hurt, even when you want to turn on personalization. Furthermore, we help them make a much better infrastructure, which means it's less costly, less complex, and easier to maintain over time. Jamstack is a principle for how you create modern web applications that are essentially decoupled. So in a traditional Sitecore, you would have Sitecore running all of the page execution, page builds, and all of that. Whereas with Uniform for Sitecore, we can help remove a lot of that work from Sitecore and do it ahead of time, which also means when you want to scale for Black Friday or something else, you don't necessarily have to scale the infrastructure underneath, which means you don't have to scale your CD infrastructure or your XDB infrastructure, because essentially the execution of these things are no longer touching the Sitecore environments, which means it's much faster, it's much more resilient, the Sitecore servers do not go down, and a lot of the inherent problems that we typically see with Sitecore builds are solved using Uniform for Sitecore.
Okay. So when you're saying we don't actually call that CD server anymore,
Hmm.
how does that work with personalization? Because as far as I know, this is dynamic, right? You have to go
Yes.
to an origin, ask for, hey, in what persona or segment or rule does this user fit? Give me some information so I can render something dynamically. But in
Yes,
Jamstack, that doesn't
precisely.
happen. So
No, true.
how did we solve that?
Yeah, true. That's one of the really beauties of what we have done with Uniform for Sitecore. We have created a product that allows you to utilize all of the benefits that you normally have with Sitecore. So great CMS, the ability to set up personalization in Experience Editor, work with Experience Editor, and then when you publish, Uniform for Sitecore will essentially do all the hard work and also take out personalization rules and taxonomies around personalization and essentially create a build of your site in a format that can be executed outside of Sitecore. So we
Mhm.
take the whole site, including the personalization, and lift that into a CDN. And on that CDN, we then allow or we execute the personalization and run it from the CDN instead of running it from the CD servers and doing all the origin callbacks. And in this context, an origin callback would be, as you said before, calling back to the infrastructure to understand how and what do I now need to show to the user. So a scenario, I come from a different country somewhere in the world, and when I hit the website, I should see a different hero banner, for instance. Traditionally, that would require you to go back to Sitecore, see the infrastructure, get that basically understanding, and then have a piece of content sent back to you. That's an origin call. With Uniform for Sitecore, that doesn't happen. We have everything gathered already on the edge so that you don't do those callbacks. And that generates an extremely fast response when you want to do personalization. And it is also now scalable because there's no dependency on the backend. So no more scaling of infrastructures.
Yeah, so when I worked at agencies and we used to use Sitecore all the time, we loved that product, and I still do, because it really enabled businesses to transform and do great stuff. And every brand that we worked with always wanted personalization, but it was kind of hard to do. So it's important that I'm saying this. It's not impossible. It really is possible. We've seen amazing personalization with Sitecore. It's just that it becomes a little bit slow sometimes when you scale it up, and it's complicated that way.
So what we do with Uniform for Sitecore to alleviate that, you come from the agency side, I come from the product side. I spent a significant amount of my time and professional career working on the product side with Sitecore as well. And what we typically saw was clients were finding it very difficult to enable personalization for a few reasons. One of them being Sitecore is a great platform, but it also has a very complex infrastructure to maintain, build out, and scale. That infrastructure is tough to handle. It's expensive to scale because you have to scale servers and infrastructures. So many companies essentially never got around to actually fully utilizing the personalization features of Sitecore because of that. Also, when it was then enabled, because you had an infrastructure or an architecture where you would have to go back to Sitecore multiple times, especially turning on personalization, that would also put additional strain on your infrastructure and make your site perform even slower. And with Uniform, we are essentially solving all of those problems. So when I first saw this architecture from Uniform, also before joining the company, I was quite intrigued because I saw here, based on my experience in my career, that this was actually something that solved more or less all of the problems that I had seen again and again and again when I was talking to customers in my previous professional career. And that was very intriguing to me.
So how about we just show something, right? Let's demo a little bit how we do these things and how easy it is to actually do the personalization. And I think one of the cool thing is at one point we can turn off Sitecore and still see the website working, right?
Yes,
okay, so
exactly.
let's go for it. Let's share your screen and let's go over it.
Here we are at our familiar UI in Sitecore, where we can open up the content editor and experience editor and all the other tools that we're familiar with when we work in Sitecore. Let's navigate to the desktop, and then from here on open up the content editor, because then I'll show you our fairly simple MVC-based site. It's also super important to mention here that with Uniform for Sitecore, you can do this from Sitecore 8.2 and up. So we work with MVC builds, we work with SXA builds, and of course we also work with JSS builds. So you can do what I show you here. You can essentially start doing all the way back from Sitecore 8.2. And what we're working with here is we're focusing on personalization today to sort of really show how you can use the common and standard features in Sitecore, but now you have a very different model for executing this. And you will see when we go through the demo, and also when we start turning off Sitecore, that these things work even though the Sitecore infrastructure is not there. And one of the things that we typically talk to customers about is also, how can we help you cut cost on your current Sitecore infrastructure? Because with this approach, you can put yourself on a path where you can consider scaling down or altogether turning off parts of your infrastructure, depending on how far you sort of take Uniform and take the whole move to a more sort of decoupled stack. But This is very familiar to most that are working in Sitecore. So of course I could choose to work in the content editor with my content, or I could directly go and open up the experience editor. So let me just work in the experience editor here.
Sure.
So the experience editor loads up and shows me my site. I have a simple site that are composed of a set of pages. So I have a front page, and on the front page, I have a content block that holds a set of different personalization patterns or rules. So I have one that is based on my GUIP. I have one that is triggering a goal. I have one that is related to a pattern and a profile in Sitecore. And last but not least, we can trigger it based on a campaign.
Okay.
So some very common ways of trying to do personalization in Sitecore, and they have all been set up here. And when we go through this, we'll basically do some changes here and see them get published, and then we'll show how this now works completely decoupled from Sitecore. Before we do that, I'll just briefly show you how these personalizations work on the live side now, so that we can see the changes we're doing, how they flow through the system. So the site is running. In this scenario, I'm working with Cloudflare as CDN. And on Cloudflare, I have deployed my site, and I'm running all of this completely decoupled from Sitecore in what is called a Cloudflare worker. But essentially, this is just a CDN, a smart CDN. And on the front page here, I have all of these different personalization rules, and I'll just trigger them one by one now, starting off with triggering the GUIP-based signal. I'm based in Denmark, so right now I'm seeing hello stranger, but as soon as I switch over to a VPN where I'll be based in the US and I refresh the page, we'll see that it will now trigger a GUIP-based rule. So I will just navigate to my VPN client here, and I'll connect to the US. I'm now connected to a VPN node in the US. And if I go back to my website and refresh this, we now see that it is personalizing for me as if I was truly physically based in the US.
And so there's a rule inside Sitecore now that says, hey, if you are from the US, show this little piece of content, right?
Exactly. Okay, so this is standard Sitecore personalization. We have made no changes to the workflows in Sitecore. So for marketers and editors and people that are used to working in Sitecore, all of the workflows are maintained, and Uniform essentially just hooks in when you get to the publishing. So part of the publishing routine is communicating with Uniform and let Uniform do what Uniform does to make this available on the CDN. So one of the other really big benefits of this is when you work with Uniform like this, this is working outside of Sitecore, and we still have the personalization and we still want to understand what is going on. Traditionally, all of this data would be tracked on your Sitecore servers. So when a visitor comes to your website, the CD server would essentially track what was going on, which page was seen, was there any profile information, which goals were triggered, all of this. And then all of this information would be put into XDB. When we are working like this, completely decoupled, and we don't have that connection to the CD servers, then we need to do something else. Luckily, Uniform provides full tracking and full analytics on all of these parts that Sitecore CD servers would normally do. So all of the data is still tracked, and Uniform can then push all of this data back to XDB, or we can push all of this information into Google Analytics. And if we push it into Google Analytics, what we essentially do is that we augment your traditional Google Analytics with additional information on personalization and Sitecore page views. So all of the regular XDB data now essentially becomes available in Google Analytics, which again allows you to do some really clever things in terms of remarketing based on personalization and stuff that happens inside of Sitecore. So the next thing that will happen is we want to trigger a goal. So I click and go to the goal page. So this is essentially a sub page in my website called goal. And on this page inside of Sitecore, we have attached a goal. And when I now go back to my front page, you will see the the goal that we triggered has now been used for personalization. The next thing is we click the pattern page. So now we come to a different page, and on this page, we're triggering a pattern that has been configured in Sitecore. And let me just go into to the back end here, or the extension, and show you. This is essentially the profile and the pattern that are configured inside of Sitecore, so we can see which profile and which pattern are being used inside of OS, has been configured in Sitecore, and that it has now been triggered on the front end. And again, this is what we're tracking and sending into Google Analytics. When we've gone through the demo, I'll just open up Google Analytics to show you how these things come in as well. So now we've seen that we triggered a pattern, and if we go back to the front page, we basically now see that this demo pattern card has been matched and are now used for personalization. So now we have seen essentially most of the personalization rules that were configured in Sitecore. And the last two to take a look at is the campaign rule that has been set up. The campaign rule is looking for UTM_campaign equals demo, which means if I send out an email, maybe from Sitecore's email marketing tool or some other, it could be Salesforce or anywhere, and people respond to a call to action in the email or from somewhere else, and they come to the website with this particular query string that has been set up in the rule, we use that again for personalization. So now we see campaign personalization based on the UTM campaign match. And again, all of this is available inside of the tracker that Uniform supplies, and we push all of this to Google Analytics. So that essentially concludes the initial demo of the personalization that are happening. So let's go back to Sitecore, do a change, and see that change flow all the way through. And once we have done that, let's turn off Sitecore and see that all of these things still work, even though we turn off Sitecore. So this is to prove the point that working with Uniform can put you on a path to essentially creating a different approach to how you set up your Sitecore environments and your production infrastructures.
Yeah,
good.
Cool. Living on the edge. Let's demo this and turn off Sitecore in a sec. I love it.
Yeah, let's do that. So going back to Sitecore now, as you remember from before, I have my desktop running and I have opened up Experience Editor. Experience Editor is, for most editors and marketers, the preferred tool. Unfortunately, there are still quite a few customers out there that are not working with Experience Editor. And all of the things that you see here can, of course, still be done in the regular content editor as well. We'll just use Experience Editor to do the changes that we'll work with today. So I will find my first personalization rule for USA. So I'm changing the content block inside of Sitecore, and then I want to add just some simple content. And now we've changed the headline. We want to save this. And once that is saved into Sitecore, we can publish this. And when this gets published, we'll see that this has gone through to the edge, and we can reload the site and see the change. And once that is done, we'll turn off Sitecore as a whole, and then see that everything is working still. So clicking the publish button, and as this goes through, then we'll switch over and see that the publishing, or that the change has gone through.
Approximately 10 hours later.
There we go. Publishing done. So what we see here is essentially a full readout of what has happened. Of course, we've seen that the publishing is started, and in a traditional publishing screen Sitecore, we basically just see that it has done and how many items have been created or deleted, etc., etc. What we also see here is everything that Uniform has done as part of this deployment. So Uniform does quite a lot in the deployment for us. And what we should see now is going to our live website. I will just clear out what we did before.
There it is.
There it
already
is.
Works.
It already works. So what I just did was I essentially cleared out all of the information that was in that had already been tracked to make sure that we could show this new change coming through. So this is now again deployed onto the edge. It is not connected to Sitecore and is running independently of Sitecore. So the next thing that we'll do is essentially turn off our Sitecore instance so that it no longer responds. And then I'll show you that all of this personalization still works. And the last bit would be then, let's log into Google Analytics and take a look at the analytics that are coming in from Uniform into, in this demo in Google Analytics. So this is my virtual machine running Sitecore, the Sitecore instance. So I'll open up all of the services here, and then we'll turn off the World Wide Web service that is essentially running the web server. So I'll scroll down and find it down here in the bottom and just stop that altogether. So what happens now is that the web server and Sitecore is completely shut down. And if I try to access it locally here, this is on my actual machine, we'll now see that Sitecore no longer responds. And if I shut down my virtual machine here again, go back, try and open up my desktop here, this no longer responds either. So there is nothing on the end that will connect anymore. Sitecore is effectively gone. So now I'm back on my demo. And if I refresh this, we'll see that this is still running. So I can now go to my goal page, can go back, see that my goal is triggered, can go to my pattern page, see that my pattern gets triggered and used for personalization. And of course, I still have the ability to run my campaign personalization still. So all of this is now working, but Sitecore has been shut down. So let's just very quickly dive into Google Analytics to see what was actually tracked in Google Analytics as part of the demo. In Google Analytics, what I've done is I've gone to real-time events and show the events that has been triggered in the last 30 minutes. So what you can see here is all of these different events were being triggered by our demo. So you could see that we had page views on the home page, on the goal page, and on the pattern page. And you can see different personalizations have been triggered. So looking at this, you can see that the USA, the campaign, the pattern, the goal personalization rules were all triggered in Google Analytics.
Wow, this is awesome. So now based on this, you can create some goals or funnels or whatever you want to do with analytics, right? This is great.
Yes, exactly. Maybe you want to say that again.
Also push this? Could you then also push this back to XDB if you wanted to?
Yes, you can get the same information in XDB. That's a simple configuration of Uniform in Sitecore, and you could essentially also do both. So you could push to Google Analytics, but also push to XDB. Maybe you want to do this in a transition period or something.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of an offline thing, but that's fine, I guess.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So now we've seen a lot of things. Let's do a quick recap.
Yes.
I think for me, the most interesting part, like, as two things for me. Well, I'm a front-end dev, right? So I love the Jamstack and the workers thing. That's cool. That just makes it all so much faster and so much cooler as a developer to work with. But the other one is you don't have the cost of the CD servers anymore. No. Right? I remember being on Azure, having to scale CD servers like a lot because of Christmas time or whatever. That just costs so much money. Right now, we're on the Cloudflare workers. I don't know the cost exactly, but I'm assuming it's a little less, right? What do you think?
Yeah, it's much less, of course, depending on your traffic. But
of course,
Cloudflare workers are essentially, I'm running on a standard Cloudflare account, and the workers are involved or included in the standard Cloudflare account. And of course, if you want to scale, it does come with a cost, but it is significantly lower than hosting entire environments of CD infrastructure around the world. Yeah. So what this also is, and conclude and creating or making a conclusion on what you've seen is, because we can remove a lot of the load from the infrastructure that traditionally did this, you can put yourself on a path to massive cost reductions, because you can scale down or remove your CD infrastructure. You can scale down or choose to not work with, for instance, XDB. That will give you a much simpler infrastructure at a much smaller cost than you would traditionally have. Some of these things, or all of these things, can also be used to scale and expand your reach, for instance, into China, which for many Sitecore clients traditionally have been very hard to reach as well. But with Uniform for Sitecore, China is definitely an option as well, because you could essentially just deploy this into CDN that also operates inside of China, or at least very much on the borders of China. So
I
very
didn't even
cheap.
think of that one. It's a very interesting one. So based on what I'm hearing, if that cost is lower and your architecture is simpler, I would suggest keep the same budget, but give your agency that built your website much more
Exactly.
money to talk about storytelling,
Mhm.
business values, personalization experiences. All of that becomes now much more possible in, let's say,
Yes,
a first version of a website. And I think to
precisely.
me, having a product like this is exciting because it shifts where the budget goes, basically. And so priorities can change. And to me, that's a bright future for brands that use Sitecore and use agencies to build their websites.
Exactly. And just one little thing to add to that is this is the same for existing builds. Instead of doing full recycling of your platforms or your builds, you can use this to create a much more smooth transition towards not doing full rebits, but doing incremental builds and shifting budget around. So you essentially use more budget to do your, as you say, your storytelling and your marketing, rather than spending on infrastructure.
Exactly. So thank you very much, Christian, for giving us this overview.
Thank you too.
Please, anyone who watches this, reach out to us if you want more information. You can go to uniform.dev/signup to get, well, a demo in person, or reach us on Twitter
Exactly.
or anything. We'll put that in the description of the video.
Yes,
Cheers,
definitely.
everyone, and I'll
Cheers.
see you next time.
Yeah, see you.